Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet? What is the Cabinet doing to promote various forms of energy in a sustainable way? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. You're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. Today we're taking a look at energy and environment and how these two are very important, how they coexist with one another. My guest today is an expert on the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet. My guest today is Dr. Len Peters. Dr. Peters is the Secretary for Kentucky's Energy, Environmental Protection, and Natural Resources Programs. He served at the Battelle Memorial Institute, a leading nonprofit applied science and technology development company, where he was the Senior Vice President and the Director of the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Dr. Peters holds a doctorate in chemical engineering from the University of Pittsburgh. Dr. Len Peters, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Good morning, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. Let's get right into it and talk about the Energy and Environment Cabinet. You have two really main responsibilities. What is the mission of energy and what's the mission of the environment side?
Well, it's good to put a little bit of historical perspective on it. And when Governor Beshear took office late 2007, early 2008, he saw that there was going to be a lot of conversation that involved both energy and environment and how these complemented one another and how these, in fact, in some cases, you had to look at environmental issues at the same time you were looking at energy or vice versa. And he decided to put those two functions together. The first state to do it. Several states have done it since then. But it really is to try to look at what are the energy needs from a standpoint of the resources we have, the reliability, what they can do, what are the environmental impacts of those, and how do we have satisfy those energy needs in an environmentally proven way, and one that is really not in any way damaging the environment, trying to minimize that. So you're optimizing and maximizing your energy utilization while you are trying to minimize the environmental impacts.
Exactly. Now, you had you have a comprehensive energy and environment program, a strategic approach. What is the main thrust of that strategic program that you have, or plan, I should say?
Well, we put that together in 2008, and it was issued in the fall of 2008. Governor Beshear issued at that point in time. And it really is to look what can we do with biomass? We looked at coal. You cannot put an energy plan together in this part of the country without paying attention to the significant coal resource we have. So we were looking at coal to gas, coal to liquids, what we could do with carbon capture. And then finally, while we have a things we miss, Bill, I have to honestly say it. The price of natural gas has simply plummeted over the last 3 years. We didn't get that in 2008. If we were writing it today, that would probably be a more significant thing. But one thing we did get, and that was the role that carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, were going to play in the utilization of our fossil energy resources in the future. So we had a lot of that information in there as well.
And that natural gas, that's been a main player, a key player. Of course, we've seen the fracking that's taking place primarily in Pennsylvania, in Arkansas, and a few other places around the country. And that has brought the price down quite dramatically, as I understand it, gas. And of course, that has to be impacting the coal industry as far as sales. And plants are switching over. Many of them are going to natural gas, are they not?
That's true. The technology improvements in the fracking operations, how you fracture the underground rock, et cetera, to get more natural gas, revolutionized that industry beginning in about 2009, somewhere in that time frame. The price of natural gas before then was $8, $10 a million. The units aren't that important, but it was $8 to $10 for comparison. It fell to around $2, $2.50, same units. Now it's operating at about $3.50. Until you get to a value of somewhere around $6 to $8, does coal now become a competitive resource? So natural gas and the price of natural gas has really pushed a movement to to use more natural gas for electricity generation.
And many of the articles I read anyway, some of the scientists and geologists are saying that natural gas looked like it was really a boon, that was going to be the salvation, and that it's a cleaner form of fuel, fossil fuel, than coal perhaps. But there are also side effects from that, such as pumping all these chemicals into the ground, using huge amounts of water to force this gas out. And now they're talking about methane being released, which could be even more of a problem, leaving a bigger carbon footprint. And you have the situation where they're linking earthquakes with fracking. Is that all factual, or what is your opinion on that?
Well, that science, I think, is still being developed.
It's still being debated.
But clearly there can be environmental implications with fracking. Water pollution problems, issues relative to what's happening to the underground strata. We don't know all of those at this point in time. But the technology has really driven the price of natural gas down because we have a greater source of it. Is that going to be here 20 years from now? I think that is a question that remains to be answered. For example, if in fact the federal EPA decided to look more closely and develop stronger regulations against fracking or during the fracking process, we could see that resource dwindle somewhat and the price would go up. Methane in and of itself is a greenhouse gas, just like carbon dioxide is. In fact, on a per unit basis, it's a more intense greenhouse gas. The difference is that methane concentrations are very small in the atmosphere compared to carbon dioxide. So people are beginning to look at that as well. There's really no energy source that doesn't have some pros and cons associated with it.
You better believe it.
Right.
That's exactly right. And we have to have energy. We
That's
have no
correct.
choice.
That's correct,
exactly
yeah.
right. You mentioned nuclear, and that is an issue that for years was really kind of taboo, and now it's coming back. It seems that there's more and more discussion of doing nuclear reactors or some variation of that. What is the status of nuclear at this point in time?
Well, when you look at, let's put it in a broader context. When you look at base load generation for electricity, and that is the base load is what you're talking about when you're talking about what a manufacturing industry needs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We really have three sources here. We have coal, we have natural gas, and we have nuclear. We cannot build a nuclear plant in the state of Kentucky. We have a moratorium, a ban on that at this point in time. When you look at nuclear power as a source for electricity generation, it is the safest from point of mining the uranium to the point of delivery of any particular form of baseload energy. Nuclear also has no greenhouse gases associated with it. Big advantage. There are obviously the fears of the 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima in Japan. And that really raises a very, very strong social concern about nuclear. But when you look at the number of people who have died from any sort of accident, it's been very, very limited worldwide, especially if you look at it in the number of kilowatt hours that are generated using nuclear. So we're going to have to decide, do we want a low carbon source that nobody wants a nuclear power plant in their backyard, but their operations have been extremely safe when you look at them in the context of overall use. But when you look at them in the context of a Chernobyl or a Fukushima, what could have happened at 3 Mile Island, but what was really diverted, it raises some social concerns that I think we all have to look at. Then in addition to that, once the fuel is used, the spent fuel, there's still a lot of energy in that. How do we get that energy out so that we minimize the amount of spent fuel that we really have to store someplace for centuries? So it has its big advantages, but it also has some of those disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage I see is the social fears. But we're beginning to look at new kinds of nuclear reactors. One of them is called a small modular reactor, sort of based on the reactors that have been in nuclear submarines for many, many years. And that looks like it has some promise as well.
Now, that point you mentioned about the spent fuel rods, are we getting closer to figuring out what to do with that? I've heard all kinds of ideas like burying them in deep caverns in Nevada, perhaps putting them on a ship, a rocket ship, and sending, or a missile and sending them to the sun. Are we getting any closer to figuring out what to do with them? Because they could last like 40,000 years, can't they, or something? Well, some huge amount of time.
No, that's a very
very
good question. But it's a very good question, because this is part of the information that the general public needs. They need to understand, and we need to really inform them about it. France has been doing a fantastic job with recycling that that spent fuel, those rods. And what they do is get additional energy out of it, so that they reduce the volume that has to be stored in some underground repository, such as Yucca Mountain, or something similar to that. So they get an additional maybe 70% of the energy back out of that because of that recycling process. The United States has not picked up on recycling that yet. And there are debates on should we begin recycling or shouldn't we. Some of the scientists say, no, we have better technologies on the shelf. Others say, well, if we can go ahead with the recycling and reprocessing, we can reduce the volume, and Yucca Mountain could be in service for 50 years in terms of accepting it. But those materials will be there for centuries and millennia. But it has the big benefit of we aren't putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at the same time. So it's that balance that we're trying to get between the environmental impacts and our energy needs that we have as a nation and in fact, as a world.
Exactly. And it's so critical to get that balance, because we have to have the energy, and as you mentioned, there's really no clean form of energy completely.
Right.
But by the same token, we have to have it. Let's go to coal. That's a big ticket item in Kentucky. Of course, we've seen over the past several years that the number of coal miners has actually decreased because of automation, because of coal plants, utility plants shifting from coal to gas. We're down to about 12,500 coal miners in West Kentucky, something like that.
No, in total Kentucky, about 12,500.
Throughout the state.
Throughout the state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what is the current status of coal? We're doing deep mining, but that's getting harder to do. The veins are being depleted. We're doing strip mining, and even some of that may be getting more difficult. I'm not sure. But what is the status of coal at this point?
Well, in Kentucky, you really have a tale of two coal fields. You have the Appalachian coal fields, and you have the Western Kentucky coal fields, which is part of what is called the Illinois Basin. The Appalachian coal fields are particularly being hit. The seams are thinner. Cost of getting it out of the ground are more expensive, whether you're strip mining or whether you're deep mining. As a result, if you look at coal coming out of eastern Kentucky, it is probably the most expensive coal in the United States. So you see that impact occurring, and of course the decreased use because of natural gas for electricity. The coal mining going on in western Kentucky is really pretty stable. In fact, it might be even increasing a little bit. So you have a tale of two coal fields. Eastern Kentucky coal field, I believe most people will concede that we're seeing a fundamental structural change in the coal markets coming out of eastern Kentucky. It's been a boom-bust economy for 100 years. But this may be one of those where we see some mini booms, but it's going to be on a downhill slope overall. Western coal, I think, will continue to be used, continue to be reasonably healthy, probably see some increases in that particular regard.
Now, as I understand it, the biggest coal field, I guess, is in Wyoming.
It is.
And then West Virginia second, Kentucky is
Third.
third.
Yeah.
And we still see the number of miners. There's been a lot of interest in East Kentucky since the War on Poverty and a variety of the SOAR program, Saving Our Appalachian Region, which is a major program. But what is, I know this is not your department, but are we doing things, or is the Labor Cabinet or the Economic Development Cabinet doing things to help the coal miners who have been really have lost their jobs? And it appears there are going to be more and more cutbacks as time goes along because of automation, because of the switch to natural gas. But are there programs underway to assist them to retrain and maybe to recruit other industries into Eastern Kentucky, which perhaps could offset these jobs, maybe a solar plant or something like that?
Yeah, Bill, all of the above is happening. There are specific programs through our Education Workforce Development Cabinet that they're trying to assist the miners that have been displaced. Obviously, the SOAR program that Governor Beshear and Congressman Rogers have been pushing, we're hopeful that we're going to see some positive outcomes of that. It is a challenge to really look at what might be the right opportunities in any part of the state, but particularly in Eastern Kentucky. There's a good human resource potential there. They have to be retrained. They have to be informed and educated on other sources of employment. So I think we have a lot going on in that area. Economic Development Cabinet, Secretary Larry Hayes, who I spent a lot of time talking with, he and his people are looking at it. Secretary Zawacki in Education and Workforce Development, they're looking at it. So it really is a government-wide effort that the governor and Congressman Rogers are really looking at. The federal government has to help because it can't be done simply on the basis of state funds alone. And the Appalachian Regional Commission is contributing, and there are other grants that are coming in. It's not going to be something that occurs overnight. It took us a while to get to where we're at, so it's going to take us a while to get back to where we need to be. Do we see coal being a critical element of that economy? Let me speak from my perspective. It will be an element in that economy, but it is not going to be the driving element that it has been for 100 years.
Exactly. As we look at the coal production and we look at Eastern Kentucky, but we're talking about Kentucky today, but this is a microcosm, really. What we're talking about today, the same issues are being dealt with by state governments all around the United States, by provincial governments in virtually every country of the world, regardless of whether they have coal or they're doing fracking or they have natural gas, because they're all dependent upon energy to some degree.
That's
so
correct.
we're focusing the spotlight on Kentucky today. For years, we've heard about clean coal technology. I used to work for the bipartisan staff arm for the General Assembly, and years ago that was, excuse me, excuse me, I get choked up when I think about clean coal. But where are we today on the clean coal technology? Have we made advances in this area, or is it something that there's just too much carbon in coal that you can't deal with it?
Well, you want to use coal because there is carbon in coal.
Well, that's true. That's right.
I mean,
or sulfur, I should say.
You don't want the sulfur in there, and you
don't want the sulfur.
You don't want the nitrogen in there, but you want the carbon in coal because that's what you burn to make the energy to boil the water to drive the turbines that are going to give you the kilowatt hours that you need in your home or my home or that particular business. We've made some progress in that regard. Carbon capture storage, about 8 years ago, was viewed as really the critical way to move forward. To be honest, we haven't made as much progress as we had hoped we would by this point in time. It's a very difficult problem because you really have 2 or 3 elements to it. One, you have to get the carbon dioxide out of the flue gas. That's an expensive process. We know how to do it. We've been removing carbon dioxide in the chemicals industry for years. We know how to do it. We know how to get it done. Can we reduce the cost? Yes. Okay. But we're talking about huge volumes of gas. We're talking. The second thing is once we get it out of there, we have to compress it. Then we have to store it in appropriate geological repositories where in fact it's not going to seep back out. So do we have those repositories, that sort of geology where we need them? We don't know the total answer to that, and in fact some of those geologies that you want may not in fact be where you want them to be. They may not be close to a power plant. So when you put all of those things together, it's more a technology problem than it is a scientific problem. We know how to do it. It's expensive, and whenever you do it, you're going to increase the cost of electricity, which is important to a state that manufactures as many things as we do, whether it's cars, refrigerators, or whatever. Those electricity costs are very, very important. So we're trying to look at it in the context of how do we keep the impact on electricity costs to a minimum.
Exactly. Well, before we run out of time, let's talk about clean energy, solar,
Right,
and
sure.
wind and that type of thing.
Right.
We see that Germany, which is not noted for its sunshine, beautiful country, great people, but they're pushing to try to get 40% of their energy from solar at some point. We see solar panels going up all over in Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, various areas like that. What you mentioned solar a few minutes ago.
Right.
What is Kentucky doing to focus on, let's just say, solar or wind, to look at alternative forms of energy, which we're moving, various parts of the world are moving towards very quickly?
Well, solar and wind have a lot of advantages. They probably have minimal impact on the environment. Not that they're completely impact-free, but minimal impact on the environment. The problem is they're intermittent. You know, if I have a big pile of coal out there, or I have some nuclear rods in a reactor, I'm getting that electricity out in the nighttime when I need it, when the sun's not shining, okay? I'm getting it out maybe during the daytime when the wind may not be blowing or whatever. So solar and wind cannot become reliable sources yet for baseload generation, that 24/7, 365 that we need. There's a fundamental technology challenge out there, and that is how do we store that electricity that wind and solar is generating so that we can use it in the night when the sun's not shining, or in those days when the wind's not blowing. When we solve that problem, and I think that probably a 25-year time frame, if we solve that problem, solar and wind are going to become more than just on the top of your house or just on the top of somebody else's house. That's the problem that we have to solve. We are supporting some solar projects in the state. We have a significant one that we're doing down at Fort Campbell. Combination of funds from the state, from funds from local government, and the federal government.
On the military base?
Yes, that's correct. And so we have a number of projects going on like that. But until we solve that fundamental problem, that the electricity that's being generated during the day by solar, that we don't need then, but we'd like to have it in the night and can store that, until we solve that problem, they're going to continue to be ancillary sources and not the primary source.
Well, Dr. Peters, in the last minute or so we have, what do you see? I know we've talked about many problems today, many challenges, I'll say. What do you see as the number one challenge as we look to move further into the 21st century, utilize our energy resources, and still do so in a sustainably developed way and not contribute to climate change?
Well, and that was this goes back to the energy plan that we put together. We said at that point in time, the greenhouse gas emissions are something we're going to have to deal with. And as we continue to use fossil fuels, whether it's natural gas or coal, we're going to have to figure out how we can reduce those CO2 emissions in the atmosphere so that we do not create some of the potentially bad effects that we see from greenhouse gases. That, to me, is the critical thing, because fossil fuels are going to be around, whether it's for electricity, the automobiles that you drive, or for other purposes. How are we going to solve that problem? To me, that is the number one energy and environmental problem that we're dealing with today, and it covers both facets of what we do in the cabinet.
Exactly. And we need to focus attention on these because they're so important, these issues we've been talking about today. And of course, we see there's a lot of information out there. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued its fifth report not too long ago.
That's correct.
Focusing on what humans are doing to contribute to climate change. We see that we have to have various forms of energy, and we have to move forward in this area, because if we don't, then we're going to have an uninhabitable earth, and nobody wants that, obviously. So we really need to move forward. And it's interesting to see what Kentucky is doing in the various areas, as well as other states in the United States. And really people all around the world. China right now is dealing with terrible pollution problems. There was a study not long ago that showed the people in the northern part of China, their life expectancy was reduced 5 years because of the pollution in their area. So these are major problems. But Dr. Len Peters, the Secretary of the Cabinet for Energy and Environment in the state of Kentucky, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I am Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.